Hello and welcome to the NBA Outlet Preview Series presented by OTGBasketball.com. Make sure you subscribe to us on iTunes. Also give us a follow on Twitter at OTGBasketball. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me today, in for Corey Waldron, Jonathan Ebrahimi. What's up, John?
Hey, Nick. Glad to be back. Always a pleasure. Let's talk some Detroit basketball.
Ready to talk Detroit, continue our NBA Outlet Preview Series. Team number 21, the Detroit Pistons. Before we talk about the ranking, we're going to talk about the Pistons from last season. Disappointing year. They did not make the playoffs. What were your thoughts on the Pistons from last season?
Disappointment is right, Nick. It was a bad year for Detroit, and whenever you see a young team that made the playoffs the prior year struggled with the way that they did, and I'm sure Stan Van Gundy's upset. Reggie Jackson's going to be upset. I'm sure they're going to use it as motivation for the coming season, but it's hard to pull positives away from a year where your young players regressed. As a team, your chemistry regressed, and as a result, you missed the playoffs.
Yeah, it was a tough season for Pistons fans. I mean, after the previous year making the playoffs, we know they lost in the first round, but they were gritty. I think they played the Cavs the year before. They got swept, but they showed some promise, and people were like, the Pistons could really have a nice season if they all improve. But when your two best players, and Reggie Jackson and Andre Drummond, both have down years, it's really tough for the team to have any type of success.
You're right, and you hit the nail on the head with that one. That they played the Cavs really close in all four games. It was a tough. I was cheering for the Cavs in that series, but it was tough watching them grind out those games against the Pistons. But that's what Detroit basketball is all about. That's what it's always been about. So to see the effort and the hustle kind of dip down this past season, it was disappointing.
Yeah, especially for like a gritty, tough team and like a Van Gundy team, we kind of expected more out of the Pistons, and they just really didn't bring that last season. And it's tough to find highlights, but what would be a highlight of last season for you?
The more I look at it, the more difficult it is to find a highlight for this team. But I guess the only real highlight, I mean, you could say Tobias Harris was a highlight because he did play well. He did have a decent season, but he didn't really improve from the year before. So I'd say the main highlight for Detroit last year was the fact that they're playing their last season in the Palace at Auburn Hills, and they're moving into that new arena in Detroit. But other than that, end to a historic run in a historic building, I don't really see a highlight.
Yeah, no, it's really tough to find one. Like, it's almost Tobias Harris by default just because everybody else had such a bad season. And like you said, I guess a highlight last year in Auburn Hills. I think they're going to Little Caesars Arena, I think it's called, in Detroit now. So that's pretty cool. Obviously there's some great memories there. But disappointments, this is easy to find. What would be your biggest disappointment?
For me, the biggest disappointment was Andre Drummond. An all-star last season, averaged 16 and 15. He regressed to 13 and 13. His shooting percentages were up a little bit, but his minutes were down. Van Gundy was benching him in the fourth quarter, and he just looked apathetic from the beginning of the season to the end. And for me, I was expecting a big kind of breakout year for Drummond. I thought he'd make it into that tier of center to kind of rival Hassan Whiteside and DeAndre Jordan, but instead he kind of fell flat, and I really don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, it's like Andre Drummond is a really tough player to gauge because if you're getting benched and they're putting Aaron Baines instead of you on the floor, that's saying a lot. It's just like Drummond at times just did not seem interested in playing basketball. And the Pistons obviously weren't having a great season, but you're one of the leaders of this team. And I think that was a underlining issue for the team as well is, there wasn't any true leadership. And having, your two best guys have down years, it's just like who's really going to lead the ship and steady everything. And that didn't happen. And Drummond's in a weird situation. The Pistons are in a weird situation too because he's been on the trade block now for what seems like almost a year. So I don't know if he's going to end up getting moved or if they're going to even be able to move him because I'm sure the Pistons want some value, but teams probably look at it as, are we going to trade for a 7-footer that we maybe can't play in the fourth quarter and he cannot hit his free throws because he's still shooting under 40% from the free throw line.
And not only that, I mean, how much longer are guys like Drummond going to be relevant in the NBA? He's useless outside of the paint. I mean, he can finish around the rim quite well, but outside of that, he doesn't have a jump shot. His free throw percentage is below 40%. And the things that he's supposed to be doing, like blocking shots, he's just not doing at a rate that makes up for all of his all the areas that he lacks in. So I just don't see a place for him in today's NBA if he doesn't start to round out his game a little bit.
Yeah, he needs to be physically imposing on the other team if he wants to stay on the floor. He needs to own that paint. And if he's not putting an effort, he's not going to do that, and he's not going to be on the floor. And that could end up leading to. We wouldn't be surprised if I see Andre Drummond in a bench role in like 2 seasons because that's how bad he's been looking. But for me, disappointment. We mentioned Reggie Jackson. That's a pretty easy one, but that was more based off an injury with his tendonitis, in my opinion. Obviously, I think any time when you miss games early in the year, it's hard to get your rhythm back. And I think that was evident with Reggie Jackson. But I'm going with Stanley Johnson, a young guy that I expect to take a bigger jump this year. And he just had a really bad year. His confidence looked shook. His shooting percentages were all down. It was just a rough year for Stanley Johnson.
Yeah, he kind of disappeared as the season went on. And after all the talk about being a LeBron stopper in the playoffs last year, we kind of expected something big for him this year. And that just wasn't the case. His shooting rates were down across the board. His minutes were down. His production fell flat. And I think, not like you said, he lost his confidence, but I also think he lost the confidence of the coach. And that really hurt him down the stretch.
Yeah, and it's sad to see because he's a talented guy. And it's just like, these young guys, when they lose confidence, it just says so much about them. And it'll be interesting to see if he can bounce back this year because there was opportunities for him. They needed somebody to step in that wing spot because they had some injuries at different points and they needed somebody to step up defensively, offensively, and he just couldn't do that. So, but what do you think about this ranking for the Pistons? Number 21 in our OTG writers power rankings. You think that's a fair rank for the Pistons going into the season?
I think that's fair. I mean, they didn't do enough last season to warrant being put up any higher than being 21. In fact, I think 21 might even be a little bit generous, given the young talent on some of the teams below them. But they really didn't do enough to garner any more respect than that. And I mean, at the end of the day, they were still 37-45. They weren't terrible. They're definitely worse teams. So I think 21 is a relatively fair assessment.
Yeah, I think 21's fair. Like you said, I could see them a few touches lower just because the way they finished last season. They did add some pieces this year that maybe could help them in terms of leadership and just, playing the right way. But it's tough to really, I don't have high hopes for the Pistons. Last year, I was a little bit higher on them because I saw the young talent and I was like, all right, this team can get better. But after watching them last year, I don't know if they're going to get better. I don't know if they're going to get worse. It's really hard to, gauge this team.
It is. And then to kind of piggyback off of your point about young talent, you look at other teams that are in a similar position, and to be quite frank, the young talent on those teams is just better.
Yeah, and there's guys on the team, like, not to throw shade at Andre Drummond, but those guys with young talent, they want to play. And like Andre Drummond, I just don't know if he's interested in being a great NBA player.
Yeah, I mean, last season that would have been a crazy thought, right? But after the performance last year, it calls into question a lot of what you thought about guys.
Yeah, especially because like last season he was bad, but the previous season he started off like the year with dropping crazy numbers. I think he had some like high 20s, high teen rebound games, and it was like a 5-6 game stretch where he was like, holy shit, who's this Andre Drummond guy that's just dominating everybody? We've never seen him play like this before. And everybody's like, oh, they got rid of Greg Monroe, that'd help him out, but it didn't really work out that way. But I mentioned additions. We'll start with the draft pick. I think number 12 overall, they drafted Luke Kennard. Luke Kennard was a guy that definitely went up draft boards. He was known as a shooter. He does have a little bit more to his offensive game. What do you think about the fit of Luke Kennard in Detroit?
I like Luke. Even separate away from how he fits in Detroit, I like his game. I see him as kind of like a JJ Redick type of player. He's talented. He's roughly the same size. I think he's 6'5". Redick is about 6'4". He's a talented guy. He's got a solid handle, solid fundamentals. I like his game, and but Detroit has been lacking over the years. They've been lacking 3-point shooting. They've been lacking kind of fundamental skills. They've got a lot of great athletes. They got a lot of great defenders. But in terms of the 3-point shooting, in terms of the ability to create for yourself, create for others, add a little bit of a different look, I think he brings that. Sorry, go ahead.
I like Kennard as well. The way I view Kennard, he's never going to be an all-star type player, but he's a complementary guy that's going to come in and fit in multiple systems. Like you said, he can shoot the ball. He has an offensive skill set. It's not amazing, but he can still do things, and he's a high basketball IQ guy. And he's a guy that I always like college players that consistently get better. Looking at his years at Duke, like he gotten better each year, and that's why he was there. Going to the season, I don't think many people had him as a lottery pick, and he ended up going 12th overall. So that just says a lot about him and what he was able to do to improve his stock.
Yeah, you're right. He's definitely not somebody who's going to scare you with his athleticism, and he's not going to be, like you said. He may never be an all-star. That's probably the most likely case. He may be one of those guys that kind of squeak in, be in the right circumstances in one year, have a great year, and make a wild card spot in the all-star game. But I mean, this is all kind of projection at this point. But he's a solid player. He's the right fit for this team because what he brings to the table is exactly what Detroit's lacking.
Yeah, exactly. And he just in that, we'll see what happens with him. And like I said, I always kind of like players that I think that I could fit into multiple systems and fit in multiple schemes. And that's always a nice, effect for a player. If the Pistons want to change things up a little bit, Carnard's a guy that they could have if they maybe go in another direction. But talking about trade, the Pistons had an interesting offseason. They traded Marcus Morris for Avery Bradley. Obviously, Avery Bradley was the better player in this trade, but this trade in signing of Lance and Galloway pretty much eliminate them from keeping Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, which we'll talk about a little bit. But what do you think about the addition of Avery Bradley with the Pistons?
I like it. I like it. I see what you're saying about kind of leading to them going in a different direction from Caldwell-Pope, but I think at that point they'd kind of given up on him. I don't think they were as sold on him as they were the prior season, and I think Avery Bradley, in all honesty, is kind of an upgrade at that position. He may not be as young, but he's definitely more talented, and in terms of what they want to do next season, he's going to help them get there a little bit faster. Avery Bradley he had a breakout year last year. Great 3-point shooter, unbelievable defender, a little undersized at his position, but he's got a little bit of a handle as well, so he can kind of play off the ball. He can play a little bit on the ball. I like him as a backcourt player, and I think he fits well with Detroit's style of play.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of Avery Bradley. I mean, he's another player that consistently improves. He's gotten a lot better for when he first came in the league. All he could do was play defense. Now he's got an offensive game. He can shoot the ball. And I think he'll give them some much needed shooting and offense. He's a guy who just consistently can play. He's an NBA player that has a high basketball IQ. He's going to bring extra toughness and energy. And I think that's something that the Pistons need is they need a veteran that's going to do things the right way on the floor and do what Van Gundy asks. And, he also can provide you some nice catch and shoot opportunities when the offense is stalling out. And it'll kind of help spread the floor a little bit more for Andre Drummond if things work out with him.
Yeah, he's a really good fit, and like you said, he adds that 3-point shooting that they didn't have last season, or at least they didn't have consistently. But on top of it all, I mean, he is one of the better perimeter defenders in the league, and I think that's exactly what Detroit, what they're looking for is that guy. They don't want to give up anything on the defensive side, but they definitely need to bring in some shooting and some offense to kind of fix that system a little bit.
Yeah, and he kind of sets a good example for the younger players on the team. This is how you play defense. You ride the other guy all night and just make his life extremely difficult. And Avery Bradley does a good job on that. So, I mean, you can't complain about this as a Pistons fan. The only thing I think you have to worry about, I believe Avery Bradley's on a contract year, so there's a good chance you would probably have to pay him this year if you want to retain him.
Yeah, and that's always an issue. I mean, I think there's a good chance that if Detroit want to keep him, that they will keep him, but whether or not they want to pay him, that's going to be the issue. I think that's going to be the issue for a lot of teams this year is that there's going to be a lot of fringe all-star players that deserve their money, but whether or not teams are in a position where they're ready to pay that kind of money to guys that are averaging 16 points, it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds. I'm sure we're going to be for a crazy offseason next year, and I think Avery Bradley is going to be a part of that.
Yeah, I'm making an early prediction for the offseason next year. We're going to see a ton of trades, probably more than we saw this season, because so many teams are going to have their cap dried up, and there's going to be only a few teams, and there's some bad teams that have a ton of cap space last year, so don't be surprised to see a lot of salary dumps or just teams just flip-flopping and trying to move guys around to change things up because they can't sign free agents because of the way the cap has dried up so fast.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think next year's offseason is going to be crazy, and it'll be interesting to see how it all folds out because I think what happens this year in the playoffs, if the Warriors win again, there's going to be a lot of good teams that are just going to throw in the towel.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we saw it this year. We saw a few teams throw in the towel, and we saw a few teams go all in. So next year, depending on the Warriors and what happens in the playoffs, obviously I think we could see the cap raise a little bit because I don't think the Cavs and Warriors are going to dominate the playoffs as easily as they did last year, but who knows? But hopefully they don't, and there's a little bit more revenue to go around, so then maybe the cap can go up a little bit, but that's for another day. Pistons also made some signings. They signed Lanston Galloway and Anthony Tolliver. What are your thoughts on these two?
Anthony Tolliver, I like Anthony Tolliver. He's he kind of goes under the radar a little bit, but he's a stretch forward that brings a little bit of toughness to his position. I believe this is his second stint in Detroit, but I could be wrong about that. So
I believe so. I believe so.
So I think, he's familiar with the team. He's familiar with the city. So it'll be a nice fit. I think last year, he had a relatively respectable lineup. Or something similar to that, but he's a stretch four, and I think that fits in well with what Stan Van Gundy likes to do. You can kind of see he's trying to build Detroit, or similar to the way he built his Orlando Magic team that made it to the finals in 2010, was it?
Yeah, either 2010 or 2009, one of those years. But I like Tolliver in the sense I like what he brings. Obviously the stretch four, obviously you need bigs that can shoot in the NBA to space the floor nowadays. But I think from a leadership perspective, he always seems like a good locker room guy. And I think he's a good person to have around in Detroit.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially with those young guys and the way that they played last year, they need some veterans to be around there. And when things start to get tough, say, hey, we're not throwing in the towel. The season's not over. We got to keep moving forward. And you're right, that's exactly what they need. So I think stylistically and in terms of intangibles, Anthony Tolliver is a nice pickup.
Yeah, I think just the combination of Avery Bradley and Tolliver in terms of leadership and veterans, just like you said, the intangibles, it'll kind of just help that team improve a little bit. What are your thoughts on Galloway? I thought this was an interesting signing because Lanston Galloway has just been a hard guy to gauge. He just seems like a combo guard that really just has never really found a steady role in the NBA.
Yeah, he started off his career quite promising in New York. He looked quite good, and then from there, he bounced around a little bit, and he just hasn't been able to find, I think, a comfortable home. And that could be an issue, especially for young players. But I think he's a talented guy. He can shoot the three quite well. He's a decent ball handler, not much of a playmaker for a point guard, but he can score the ball, and I think these days that's almost become a primary objective from your guards. So you're right. He's probably a combo guard that's kind of been told he's a point guard, and that's how he sees himself. It would be difficult for him to take himself out of that, especially at his size. But I just don't think he's had enough opportunity to prove himself. Maybe this year he'll have that opportunity, although I don't think it's going to happen. With the point guard situation being as crowded and as messy as it is in Detroit, I don't know that he's going to get the opportunity to showcase what he's capable of, and I think it's going to lead to another down year.
Yeah, I think if he's going to find minutes, it's probably going to be at the two guard spot, and he's probably a little undersized depending on the teams you face. But wouldn't be surprised in the NBA. I mentioned this on other pods where teams just tend to go a lot smaller this year. Just with the constant success of the small ball in the NBA, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more smaller lineups consistently throughout the game instead of, just in the fourth quarter or in the second half. I could see teams going with more, point guard, combo guard, and then starting like two small forwards and forgetting about power forward and having a center on the floor. It wouldn't be out of the mind. Just with the success the Warriors have had and the success of small ball and three-point shooting, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that just becomes a thing in the NBA consistently.
Yeah, there's definitely the direction the league is going in, but I think the shift has been more so you're starting to see forwards shrink a little bit. The game's become easier for smaller guards, but you're definitely hurting yourself going out there with two guards that are under 6'3", even in the small ball league, with that kind of size deficiency at the point guard position. These more athletic guys like Russell Westbrook, Stephen Curry, Kyrie Irving, these bigger point guards, they're going to be able to take advantage of smaller point guards. I mean, we saw how poorly Isaiah Thomas played on the defensive end last year, and then to kind of move somebody that same height to the shooting guard position against guys like DeMar DeRozan, Klay Thompson, James Harden, they're going to get eaten alive. So I think the small ball there has to be a balance at some point. There's a lot of gain to be made offensively, but it's going to hurt you defensively.
Yeah, the one thing maybe the Pistons could do, because I think Reggie Jackson has pretty good size, and maybe they want to throw Lanston on the point guard and let Jackson try to mess with shooting guards. I think obviously every night it's going to depend on matchups, but it could be an issue for them throughout the year because we mentioned Avery Bradley's not the biggest guy. He does play good defense, but against some of the bigger two guards, he's going to still have a hard time in the post.
yeah, and it's always that's just the fact of life, right? But luckily for them, the post play is becoming less and less of a focus.
Exactly. So, I mean, we'll see what happens this year. The Pistons still, like, I don't know how I feel about the Galloway signing. I don't know necessarily if I think it's a great signing or a bad signing. It's just kind of one that I want to see what happens with his career and see what he can do in another situation. But let's talk departures. They traded Marcus Morris. He was a guy who was on this team for about 2 seasons now. He was pretty solid because his contract is amazing. I'm pretty sure he has one of the best deals in the NBA. So I think Marcus Morris trading him, it made sense to get Avery Bradley. What are they going to miss with Marcus Morris gone?
Well, they're definitely going to miss the depth that they had up in the front court. I think they've kind of replaced Marcus Morris with Anthony Tolliver or maybe John Lure, but neither of those players even come close to matching his production and what he brings to the table. He's a tough guy. He's 6'9", strong, good 3-point shooter, talented.
And he likes to
defender,
play defense. Yeah, he likes to play defense, which I think is always something important, especially on a team like this that didn't show much effort last year.
Yeah, and by the way, shout out to Marcus Morris. It's his birthday today, September 2nd. So, fitting that we do the Pistons podcast today, I guess. But he's a tough player. It's a talented guy. I think they're going to miss
He's
him.
a streaky guy too, because like, you know, he's had stretches early for the Pistons last year is like where he got really hot and he had he gets hot where he just hits like ridiculous shots consistently, and then he'll have cold stretches too. But I think they will miss him. But I think it made sense to do the trade to get Avery Bradley because I think it helps a bigger need.
It does, and it was interesting to see that trade go through because Morris was definitely one of Van Gundy's favorite players. So obviously he sees a big benefit in bringing in a guy like Avery Bradley. Otherwise, he wouldn't have pulled the trigger on a deal like that.
But other than Marcus Morris, they also lost the two guys in free agency. They lost Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Aaron Baines. And we kind of mentioned a little bit, you kind of hinted towards it. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope kind of was a letdown last year. He was another guy that his numbers were down. They kind of expected him to take a jump offensively, especially with the Reggie Jackson injury, and it just didn't happen.
Yeah, he kind of plateaued, which was interesting to see. I mean, at his age, I mean, it was the right time for him to kind of take a big leap forward, and it just didn't happen. His field goal percent dropped quite drastically. His 3-point percentage increased, but it was so bad the year before that, you know, it was bound to get better. Kind of across the board, everything just stayed the same, which is disappointing. Disappointing in a young player, especially because he did get a little bit more opportunity in the backcourt this year, at least to start the season. And just like Reggie, just like Andre, things just didn't materialize.
Yeah, especially in a contract year, you expect someone to kind of step up and put up big numbers. But his problem is he just seems limited offensively. He just doesn't really see comfortable handling the ball. He doesn't really drive to the rim enough, and he has pretty good size and athleticism, so you'd expect that a little bit more. 3-point shooting, he was solid, but he's streaky. Defensively, he has potential to be a really good defender, but he just kind of loses focus sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that was more to do with the environment that he was in than anything else. I really do believe this about Stan Van Gundy. I think his style of coaching is only good for a few years, and then players start to drown him out. That shouting and screaming and yelling, it only works for so long, but it starts to wear players out. We saw it with Dwight, and now we're seeing it with the Pistons. Whenever you have so many young guys that just kind of plateau at such an early age, you really have to start asking questions about the motivation and the coaching behind them.
Yeah, and not to say that you should baby young guys, but you have to, you know, pick and choose your moments. Sometimes, you know, a guy who's having a terrible season like Stanley Johnson, you need to do something as a coach to try to like infuse him with some confidence or just kind of tell him you believe in him. Just the whole Pistons team. That's a great point. I don't know if I'd say Van Gundy's on the hot seat, but if they have another down year, it's going to be a really interesting situation in Detroit.
Yeah, he's another example of how that whole GM coach multi-role just doesn't really seem to work out. I mean, if a guy like Doc Rivers can't seem to get it right, you know, I think maybe they need, you know, some franchises need to look at why they were doing that in the first place and reassess whether or not there's any long-term benefit.
Yeah, for me, I don't think it makes much sense. If you want to give the coach final say on any trade or whatever, signing or whatever, yeah, maybe that's okay. But to expect him to really do both roles, I mean, he's not really, you know, if he's spending a lot of time doing a GM and picking up trade calls, He's not spending enough time coaching and developing these guys. I think there's just way too much work for both positions for you to do both in the NBA at this point. Maybe back in the day when, the offseason was as crazy and the trades weren't as crazy, it might have worked. But nowadays you need a guy who's going to sit there and focus on both things separately.
Exactly. And I also, just to kind of piggyback off that, I also think the coach is too close to the players. I think that, personally their relationships are too complex for the coach to be able to make rational roster decisions.
Yeah, to be honest, like you look at a situation like Boston and them trading, Crowder and Isaiah Thomas. I don't know if Brad Stevens probably has good relationships with both those guys. I don't know if he'd necessarily want to trade them, but Danny Ainge, he's going to make the decision. He's not as close with them, and it's easier for him to pull the trigger than it would be for Brad Stevens.
Exactly, and another example could be LA, where you see a guy like Austin Rivers and the trouble that's been caused in that franchise with what has been labeled, and obviously I don't have any inside information, but what has been labeled as preferential treatment on the behalf of Austin versus the other guys on the team.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. And we saw all that drama. We don't know what's real, what's fake, but there was reports that the Clippers turned down an amazing offer to get Carmelo Anthony on their team, and all they really were giving up was Austin Rivers, and they said no.
Yeah.
So if that comes out to be true, that was just one of the worst, front office moves we've seen in a long time.
Yeah, I completely agree.
But departure, Aaron Baines is out. I honestly I have 0% likeness for Aaron Baines. He's one of my least favorite players in the NBA, so I don't think they're losing much getting rid of him.
Well, no, I mean, they're deep enough at the center position at the moment that really a guy like Baines, they're not going to miss him. He's a high energy guy. He's a hustle guy. He's a tough guy. But outside of that, he doesn't really have any tangible skills.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, he doesn't have much basketball talent. He mostly is there for his size, his toughness, and he's going to rebound and play some hard defense. But it's not like he's super athletic and he has great ball skills.
Yeah. There's very, very little that they're losing with him leaving, and don't forget they still have Marjanovic at center. He didn't play much last season. Again, he was hurt for a big chunk of the year, but I mean, the guy's 7'3", so if you're looking for size, he's definitely going to be able to add some use there.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like Boban is like a guy that sticks out. Like, soon as he's on the floor, even against like a guy like Brook Lopez, I remember seeing them match up one point last year. He makes him look tiny. Like, he's just a giant human. It's not even that he's just like 7'3". His body is just big. Like, his hands are bigger than the freaking basketball.
Yeah, so I definitely think they're going to be okay in terms of size if Boban is going to be healthy. So I don't know how much they're going to miss with Aaron Baines, but I mean, for that guy to still have a job in the NBA after 6 seasons, he must be adding something. So whether he's a good locker room guy or he's tough defensively, they're missing something, but. Again, I don't think it's anything that the Piston fans need to worry too much about.
Yeah, I feel like he's only hanging around because he has like a man bun. Nobody really likes him. But what are your predictions for Piston starters this year?
This is a tough one because if I was the coach, I would go with Reggie Jackson and Avery Bradley in the backcourt, obviously. But if I was coaching team, I would have Stanley Johnson starting small forward and Tobias Harris move to the power forward, and then Andre Drummond start at center. I don't think that's going to be the way it goes because Van Gundy is usually not really a small ball kind of guy. So I think what he's going to want to do is surround the team with enough shooting, which obviously Stanley Johnson doesn't really provide, and also build around Drummond on the middle. So I think he's going to go Reggie Jackson, Avery Bradley, Tobias Harris at the small forward, and John Lure at power forward with Andre Drummond playing center.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that's what, Van Gundy would go with. If I was in charge of the team or I was the front office, I would have tried to bring in another wing this year, like you mentioned. I like Tobias Harris at the 4 position. I just like the way where the NBA is going, and I like what he can do down there. He has the size to match up. And I'm not a big fan of playing 2 bigs anymore, especially if neither of them can really guard in the perimeter. Lear and Drummond are both going to be in trouble in pick-and-roll situations, so that already puts you at a deficiency.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand offensively where they're going, where Van Gundy's going. I can look at the the guys on the team and I can see what he's trying to do. But when something doesn't work over and over and over again, you've got to go back to the drawing board and kind of reassess your game plan. And I don't think he's done that yet.
Yeah, sometimes I think coaches can be a little bit stubborn and they want to go with, what they want to do. We saw that, and he wasn't a coach, but a front office guy, Phil Jackson, wanted to go with a certain system, and that not necessarily fitting the roster or fitting what's happening in the NBA. And you have to adjust, especially if you're the most talented team in the league. Yeah, teams are going to have to adjust to you. But unless you're the Golden State Warriors, you have to adjust to them.
Absolutely.
So, but it's Van Gundy's kind of predictable with the lineup. What's your breakout starter for the Pistons this year?
Starter, I'm going to go with Andre Drummond. And the reason I say, even though he's been an all-star before, last season was so disappointing for him. I think this is going to be his year where he kind of he's got the veteran leadership around him. He knows he's got to do something. It's coming to a point where if he doesn't make a name for himself, or he doesn't start to improve or round out his game, he's going to lose his starting position. And like you said, in a couple of years, he might find himself on the bench in some small market, in the middle of the country. So I don't know. I don't know exactly, what kind of numbers he's going to put up or how much improvement he's got to make. But I think this is going to be a year where we go, oh, right, that's who Andre Drummond is.
Yeah, I think Drummond and Jackson should both break out in the sense that last year they were both trash, and this year they should at least be, moderate to what their level of basketball is. So I expect Drummond and Reggie Jackson both to have better years. And Drummond, for him, it's like, he has up to the trade deadline to prove to the Pistons that he's worth keeping around, because I think that they'll probably move him at the deadline and start to go in another direction if things don't work out. And that probably goes for both guys. So it's like a make or break year for Reggie Jackson and Andre Drummond, I think, in Detroit, just because of how bad they played last season.
Yeah, I think so. Jackson, I think they're going to keep on the trading block, whether he plays well at the beginning of the year or not, because I think they're genuinely concerned about that tendonitis.
Yeah, no, and that's a real issue. And I'm actually relieved. I wish bad things on any players, but the Nets almost pulled the trade for Reggie Jackson for Brook Lopez back in the day. And knowing that he has that tendonitis and that's acting up right now, and he's only 27, it's not going to get any better. And that's not trying to throw shade at him or anything.
Yeah,
Tendonitis is just a terrible thing.
Yeah, you're 100% right, though. I mean, in a situation like that, tendonitis isn't something that goes away. It's generally something that's going to bother him for the rest of his career. So I think if they're gonna be looking to move either of those guys, Jackson's got to be the guy that they're going to move. Drummond's still only 24 years old. He's still got a lot of upside. He's proven that he can be a difference maker. It's just about surrounding him with the right guys to make sure that comes to fruition.
Do you think Drummond would be a little bit better off if he maybe cut some weight down, or is it better to stay at that bigger size?
It's tough to gauge. I think at a young age, as long as he's still mobile, and as long as he's got the right kind of size, and by that I mean he's a fit 280 pounds. I think he's okay to keep the size on, but as his career winds down, as he gets a little bit older, we've seen it with other guys like Tim Duncan. We saw what the exercise did to Shaquille O'Neal and how that ended his career. But he is going to have to start to trim down a little bit and let the wear and tear off of those knees.
Yeah, I think if he wants to keep the size, he needs to make use of the size. Use it in the post, use it rebounding. Have a physical presence. But if not, cutting weight might make sense. One thing I like to see from Andre Drummond is add a couple post moves, bro. You're a tough ass dude to defend in the post. You're huge. Add to your touch, get a little better down there, and you could really have a nice presence for this team. And that's exactly what Van Gundy would want. Surround him with shooters, able to kick the ball out when he gets a double team. But until he can establish himself as a consistent post player, I think it's going to be really tough for the Pistons.
I think you're right, and like you said, he's got to play his size. If you're saying add a couple post moves. How about let's start off add one post move?
Yeah.
Let's start with that, and then once you have a kind of go-to move down there, then we can talk about adding maybe a hook shot, or maybe adding an up and under or something like that. But it's right now he's so raw offensively that you're right. He has to either use his size or develop some kind of outside game, some kind of post game, some kind of ability to score without, basically muscling your way to the basket.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with that. Breakout bench player for the Pistons, though, this year.
Well, since I had John Lura on the starting lineup, I'm going to go with Stanley Johnson. I was extremely disappointed with him last year, but I've seen the talent there. When his rookie season started 2 years ago, I actually thought he had a chance of being Rookie of the Year. So I think he's got to be a guy that kind of breaks out this year. If he has another season like last season, that could really spell, disaster for him in his career. So hopefully he puts it together, and hopefully he manages to make a difference for this Pistons team.
Yeah, and then it'd be nice to see him bounce back. You never want to see guys, especially when you're young, if you have another down year, it could really hurt your career, like you mentioned. I'm going to go with Luke Kennard. I think he's a guy, he played a lot in college. He should be able to come off the bench, give them some much-needed shooting. Maybe not necessarily right away in the NBA. A lot of rookies need some time to adjust. But later in the season, I could see him finding a nice role with his team because of the shooting that he can provide.
Yeah, he does fit nicely with this team. So and that is a good pick. So I don't see any issue with that. I just hope that Stanley Johnson can kind of piece it together for the sake of his career.
Yeah, and I mean, if Stanley Johnson can step up and Luke Kennard, all of a sudden they have some, solid wings they can put out there, and they could play Tobias Harris more at the 4. Or say Andre Drummond is just terrible again this year. Maybe they play John Lear a little bit more at the 5 and go, full out shooting everywhere. It just would help the Pistons so much more if Stanley Johnson and Luke Kennard can, provide something offensively at that wing position and give Van Gundy more versatility with his lineups.
Yeah, that's if Van Gundy's going to use the versatility.
Yeah, that too. He does seem like a stubborn guy, but we'll see what happens. It's a big year in Detroit, really, to be honest. When you make the playoffs, the next year, you're expected to make the playoffs, especially when the Eastern Conference, the bottom teams weren't anything special. The Pacers seemed like they barely wanted to get in the playoffs last year. The Bulls had stretches where they looked like they were about to be a lottery team, and they just squeezed in there. So I think for the Pistons, making the playoffs is a must for this team. If not, I would not be surprised if they just decide to blow it up.
Yeah, or if they don't make the playoffs, at least look like there's a chance you could have made the playoffs. If you're going to miss the playoffs, miss by a very close margin, almost like the Heat last year. Because I think with how big of a step they took back last year, I think getting to that point where they're maybe the 9th seed and tied for the 8th seed record-wise, or they're 1 game back, I think, okay, well, we might have something here. Let's kind of push the envelope. Let's see how far we can take it. Because like you mentioned, we still got a lot of young guys on this team. Stanley Johnson's young. Andre Drummond's only 24. Avery Bradley, we kind of look at him as the vet on their starting lineup, and he's only 26. So I think they have a lot of upside if they can start to improve. But last year was such a disaster that they've got to show some kind of improvement, or Drummond's gone, Jackson's gone, and like you said, they're going to blow it up.
Yeah, and even like you said, even if they just show the effort at the end of the year and they're fighting for a playoff spot, and it's not like last year, at the end of the season last year, they had stretches where they were looking like one of the worst teams in basketball because it seemed like nobody on that team looked interested to play. I went to a game last year, they played the Nets. Jeremy Lin was out. The Nets were not really playing. I mean, they were playing more competitive at the end of the season, but the Pistons looked like they weren't interested. Brook Lopez hit a game winner over them, and Andre Drummond was on the bench in the 4th quarter. So we'll see what happens this year. But let's move on to the truth, one of my favorite segments. The emoji I picked for the Pistons is the upside down smiley face. This is probably one of my favorite emojis, and it kind of is just like me giving some extra snarky sarcasm to somebody when I say something. So for the Pistons, it's what are you guys going to finally do? Last year was such a disappointment. I'm waiting.
Yeah. If I were to pick an emoji for this team, it would be the confused face.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Because I think this entire franchise from top to bottom is just confused.
Yeah, and it's just weird. And the last time we remember the Pistons being good is when they won a championship, when they had Chauncey, Rip Hamilton, Prince, Rasheed Wallace, Ben Wallace. It was a fun team to watch, and there's a lot of team stuff, and they played defense, and everything was the right way, and they're always winning games. Since then, they really haven't been able to find a consistent bunch. And we thought, when they made the playoffs the previous year, that they were about to find that bunch, and it just hasn't worked out.
Yeah, last year was a really big disappointment. So I'm hoping they can kind of turn it around. They got their new arena. They've got a few fresh faces, a few nice veterans that they picked up. So hopefully that makes the difference.
Yeah, you always want to have at least, a playoff season when you open an arena. Even if it's the 8th seed, it's still just a good feeling to have for the fans. But league pass rating for the Pistons, where do you give them 1 out of 10?
Honestly, Nick, I'm not high on this team, so I've got them at 5 out of 10. I really don't see a lot of appeal in watching them play. There's not a lot of young guys on this team that you can say, hey, at least they've got a Devin Booker or a Karl Anthony Towns. There's just really not a whole lot of exciting talent on the roster. They've got a lot of good players, don't get me wrong, but there's not one guy that stands out. And with how bad they were last year, unless they're going to be playing one of the top teams, just very little chance I'm going to be tuning in.
Yeah, you gave them a friendly league pass rating compared to mine. I have them as a 3 out of 10. This team is just not exciting to me. It's like going to be a mediocre team at best. Even if they do squeeze into the playoffs, I'd still probably rather watch bad teams with young talent than watch the Pistons team, like you mentioned, with no real like potential superstar on that roster, no young piece that's going to be like, oh, this guy could have a breakout all-star year. Andre Drummond and Reggie Jackson could maybe get in the All-Star game when they do well, but they're not like really exciting players that have super high ceilings. So Pistons are not high on my league pass list.
Yeah, it's disappointing, especially because they're not a bad team. There are talented guys on the team, but just the sum of the parts is just not working out, and unfortunately that takes away individually from all of those good players.
Yeah, exactly. So, but you would rather watch the Pistons over what TV show that you like?
Nick, I've got a TV show that I like. It's called Veep. And
I've heard of it.
Yeah, I can't remember her name, the actress's name, but it was Elaine from Seinfeld, and she's essentially she's the vice president of the United States, and it's kind of a satirical take on what goes on in government. I'm so disenfranchised with politics right now, given with what's going on, that I would rather kind of stay away from the whole politics thing. So I'd rather watch the Pistons than watch a show that is politically based.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. I agree with you with that. And Pistons aren't too high on my list, so I'll pick a show that I don't really like. My girlfriend probably likes it, and that is Orange is the New Black. So I'd probably watch the Pistons over Orange is the New Black. I know I've been trying to throw as much shade as big TV shows as I could on this podcast series, so there's another one to the list.
I'll be honest with you. I actually like Orange is the New Black, and there's no way I'd watch the Pistons over Orange is the New Black.
See, I got into the first season, but then after a while, I was just like, I think because I just have a better idea of what like prison is really like. Not that I've been to prison, but I've watched documentaries and stuff, and just have a better idea that it just seems so fictional to me that I'm just like, it's not that fun. But
yeah, that's fair. It's definitely an up and down show. I know it's not very realistic, but hey, it's kind of a fun take on a serious topic.
Yeah, and there's definitely some funny ass scenes in that show, and some of the some of the acting in that show is extremely well. Like some of the actresses do a great job.
Absolutely,
but it's just
I think
not my cup of tea.
Yeah, I know. I see that. And I think with Netflix, what they're doing right now is they're finding a lot of really great talent. So kudos to them.
Yeah, and it's great for the people too that they're finding, because they're getting bigger roles in movies and things like that. And I give Netflix a lot of props. I like a lot of the Netflix original series are good TV shows. Like they have a lot of good shows that they've created themselves. They have bad shows as well, but they have some really good ones on there too.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first got Netflix, it was for all of the the big name content. But the reason I kept Netflix is because their original content's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of all like the Marvel ones they've put out. Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, Luke Cage, Defenders. I thought that was cool. They're going to add The Punisher. Then they have some shows like Bloodline. Orange is the New Black, I know, is really popular. I just watched a movie called Death Note. I think it's based off like an anime series. So that was pretty interesting too. I like the movies. Some of them are corny as hell, but they pass the time.
Yeah. You're right.
But that wraps up for the Pistons. So thank you, Jonathan, for hopping on. Thanks, you guys, for listening, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for having me, Nick. Always a pleasure. See you soon.